Mark never expected to walk into his apartment and find his roommate Jason sawing through their friend S. neck, an unimaginable horror that shattered everything Mark thought he knew about trust, friendship, and the darkness hiding in plain sight. Mark and Jason had been sharing a small apartment on the edge of town for about half a year. At first, everything seemed normal. Mark was a straightforward guy, working long hours at a local warehouse and enjoying quiet evenings playing video games or watching movies. Jason, his roommate, was quieter, more withdrawn. He kept to himself mostly, rarely inviting anyone over or joining Mark in social outings. Mark thought it was just Jason's personality. Maybe he was shy or had a hard time trusting others. There were no signs of trouble, no loud arguments or strange noises. The two had settled into a routine, sharing chores and splitting rent, each respecting the other's space. One week in late fall, Mark started noticing subtle changes. Jason's usual late-night lights went off earlier, and sometimes the door to his room would be locked when Mark got home, which wasn't typical. Mark shrugged it off at first, figuring Jason needed some privacy. But the silence around the apartment grew heavier, and the air felt colder, almost suffocating. Mark tried to brush away the unease that crept over him like a shadow. On the evening in question, Mark had stayed late at work. He was tired and looking forward to finally relaxing. When he arrived at the apartment, the hallway was unnervingly quiet. No sounds of a television, no music, not even the usual hum of a laptop. Mark called out Jason's name, but there was no answer. His stomach twisted with worry. Something didn't feel right. He decided to check on Jason, heading toward the bedroom down the hall. The door was slightly open, which caught Mark off guard since Jason usually kept it closed or locked. A faint light spilled out, flickering strangely in the dark corridor. Mark's steps slowed as a chill ran down his spine. He could hear a faint, unsettling noise, a harsh, scraping sound that didn't belong in their quiet home. His heart pounded, and his breath came quicker. The uneasy feeling became a weight pressing on his chest. Mark pushed the door open cautiously, and the scene that greeted him was beyond anything he could have imagined. Jason stood in the middle of the room, holding a saw, and before him lay Tim, their mutual friend. Tim was motionless, his body sprawled across the floor, blood pooling beneath him. The sight was so grotesque that Mark felt like his world was crashing down in slow motion. Jason was in the middle of sawing something. It wasn't clear at first, but the dreadful realization hit Mark as his eyes adjusted. Jason was sawing at Tim's neck. The room was bathed in a sickly red glow from the flickering lamp, the walls splattered with crimson. The metallic smell of blood filled the air, sharp and choking. Time seemed to freeze as Mark's mind raced, struggling to grasp the horror before him. Jason's face was eerily calm, his movements deliberate and methodical. It was as if the nightmare unfolding was routine to him, like he was performing some grim task rather than committing an unspeakable act. Mark's instincts screamed at him to run, to get help, but his body remained rooted to the spot, caught in a paralyzing mix of shock and disbelief. The friend he had laughed with just days ago was now nothing more than a victim of something monstrous. And the man standing over him, his roommate, someone Mark thought he knew, was the killer. The weight of the moment pressed down so heavily that Mark struggled to breathe. Every instinct told him this was the end of everything he once believed about safety, friendship, and trust. The nightmare had arrived in his own home, shattering the illusion of normal life forever. Mark's mind was spinning as he stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move or speak. The grim scene before him felt unreal, like something out of a nightmare he wished he could wake from. Jason, still holding the saw, continued his work with terrifying precision. The sound of the blade cutting through bone echoed sharply in the small room, mixing with the wet, sickening noise of flesh being torn apart. Mark struggled to comprehend what was happening. How someone he had shared meals and late-night conversations with could now be carrying out such a brutal act. The blood smeared the walls, dripping slowly onto the floor, pooling beneath Tim's body. Mark's eyes darted around, searching for some explanation, some reason that could make sense of the madness. But there was none. Jason showed no signs of panic or remorse, only cold focus. The man Mark thought he knew was gone, replaced by something far darker. Mark realized then that this was no impulsive act fueled by anger or desperation. This was calculated. Jason had planned this, and what Mark saw was the terrifying conclusion of that plan. As Jason continued, Mark's gaze landed on the surrounding room. It was oddly bare, except for a few scattered belongings and a locked cabinet that Jason always guarded jealously. The atmosphere was heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves held the secrets of things far worse than the gruesome scene in front of him. Mark's heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out everything else. He forced himself to step back slowly, careful not to make a sound. He closed the door gently behind him, the click echoing louder than it should have in the eerie silence. Mark's body trembled as he leaned against the wall, sliding down to the floor. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The image of Jason and Tim's lifeless body was seared into his mind, a permanent scar that refused to fade. Mark's thoughts raced. Should he call the police? Should he confront Jason? But the fear gripping him was overwhelming. What if Jason was still dangerous? What if he was waiting for Mark to make a move?